The status quo is always a logical option.
Can you kick planks on incentives?
David? Yeah.
Okay. Any theoretical reasons to reject the team other than T?
No.
Okay. I want to talk about, I guess, this T card, Supreme Court of Orange County. So the word that it's defining is the protection and regulation of water resources provides the power to regulate and control. I guess, why does that not include control, and why does that exclude necessarily the F?
Well, it excludes the F because we think that you're not a command and control regulation. We think that this card says that is what protection is.
Regulatory scheme. Wait, but it is preceded by a comprehensive regulatory scheme of protection and regulation necessitates regulation. Where have you defined the word protection abstractly to mean regulate?
We think that this says protection and regulation. We think that regulation obviously includes regulation, but we think that protection includes
regulation,
it as well.
Okay, so if regulation in the area of protection of water resources means regulation, where have you defined protection of water resources to necessitate regulation in every case?
We think that this was like what this card says. We can have this debate if you disagree.
Okay. The court politics decide who votes or who. I guess what's the split right now?
Right now, the Robinson evidence indicates that Roberts is sort of bringing Kavanaugh and Barrett over to his side because of the institutionalist concerns.
So Kavanaugh and Barrett would not overturn Roe.
We think Roberts and one or both of Kavanaugh and Barrett. We think he will convince at least one of them.
Okay, one question. So regarding the FATA evidence, what about the app is judicially activist?
Because it's sort of, I mean, the FATA evidence is broadly characterizing pro-environment positions like the affirmative. It talks about how they're taking slow movements now, but the plan would obviously go against that because it's a massive shift in sort of regulatory strategy for all agencies.
So Roe v. Wade is obviously one of the most contentious, issues of jurisprudence. It's been one of the big conservative goals. Why does Roberts perceive this one ruling as equivalent such that he needs to balance it against this massive conservative priority of abortion?
Right. So a couple things. One, I think you're sort of mischaracterizing. We agree that abortion is very controversial, but it's not like all the conservatives are priced into voting against it. Right now, Roberts, Barrett, and Kavanaugh are swayed by institutionalist concerns, and the argument is that the plan reverses that.
Okay. Does this current case, would that prevent? Okay, it's fine. Nimai, do you need prep? Okay. 10. 7:32. Nimai is setting out the dock.
All right, it's set.
It's a standing desk.
Dude, I forgot about this, but as soon as I heard the sound, I remember the last mission. I was like, yes, standing desk.
Let me know when people have it up. Sure, my computer is frozen right now. I have no idea what's going on. Is my camera working?
Yeah, we can see you, we can hear you.
Let me disconnect my monitor. I think that's messing it up. Okay, yeah, now everything's back to normal. Sorry about that.
We still do not have the speech, however.
Okay. Ben, is it sent?
Yeah, let me see. No, it doesn't show as sent. You're having the same issue with Spark again.
Really?
Yeah.
Can you resend?
Oh no, it's sent now. Okay.
No, it's sent. It says sent at 8:17.
Yeah, got it. I'm just
got it
downloading now.
Okay. The order is the water exemptions advantage, the NEPA advantage, the T regulations, the advantage counterplan, the incentives counterplan, the con-con counterplan, the T resources pick, the court packing advantage or counterplan, the state's counterplan, court clog, the Chevron disad, court politics, and business confidence. Is everyone good? Before argumentation of an APA Airlines agency standards of the time collapse and student security, economics and conflict, NEPA, cultural production, shows external warming, the blur carbon science. Yes, no good business is not just about the good, but also the ability of infrastructure to collapse. Happens in the case of dams are key to this in concept of energy and literal collapse leads to flooding. The resiliency doesn't matter. It's just an answer. Isn't energy security impact? Yes, food and security. Evidence is assume increasing more pressures, but also specific hotspots around North Korea, ISIS, and this propensity for conflict. NEPA advantage resolving nuclear ambiguity. NEPA education solves nuclear radiation, root plan for terrorism, unchecked nuclear terrorism. Independently spin over space, resolves dangerous conflict that cause extinction. Yes, meltdowns are indicates the NEPA lack of nuclear credibility leads to inability to balance. It's based on credibility of these specific testing. Yes, meltdowns technology is insufficient right now. It means that this overcomes any such testing because the agencies aren't required and held to the requisite standard to prevent that testing. Evidence isn't just about testing, but also about how the response to that would cause extinction. Yes, accidents. It is not just about ICDBMs, but underground testing, which uniquely spots space force. Evidence is not just about generic, it's about space mining, which creates a regulatory scheme for the no businesses impact regulatory programs is about a NEPA analysis of agencies which doesn't engage them. T regulations 1, you meet after increases NEPA and advantage standards Benson 2, the direct mandate of the planning commission court authority to apply NEPA, EIS post plan, EIS post apply and environmental factors. Courts can regulate a 16 regular may be which bodies of hard definition of restrictions by agencies. We meet plan Texas protection 3 counter regulations, the authority procedural rules. Merriam-Webster no date regulations rule dealing with procedure protection means we safe from resources from harm. You can know date protection from resources from harm in the context of water resources protection to shield resources from harm, including damaging development circum intending protection not equivalent require resources to damage protection supposed to maintain or resource not allow injury. Protect means minimizing adverse effects development causes and protecting protected resources for station or evidence is intended to define context size to definition or refutes a command control is uncarded 5 Afghan all restrictions have damage pollution public trust over 6 over limiting no af means command control 7 because burdens were not the af 6 protecting water resources a question of solvency not T 8 functional limits bis titles and bis context politics based to 8 9 reasonability of substance kind of always minor not allowing the advantage counter the incentives counter plan do counter plan perm do both shows perm do the combination the plaintiff doesn't have advantage 1 it's about the Goldilocks scenario for regulation too much and too little and forcing fiat and compliance doesn't work for doesn't have advantage to signal of court complying precedent you have NEPA as key for space spending it's great regulatory certainty of credibility it's important whether or not these are perceived as fair the food aid fails the other countries don't accept it and it's not the sufficient scale of collapse of US ag outweighs via down because if we don't have the food aid in the first place the down upgrades the down EAS analysis is key to adaptation measures the can plan cannot solve the lack of information the evidence is specific to EAS analysis being key only analysis of climate impacts is key condos bad destroys policy analysis causes tragedy kills death this solves your offense independently no judging consider her impossible as to defend multiple links in a benefit preserves lobby environmental laws hurley 20 in what turns directly label one mission country federal authority yourself legal cases chances scope of environmental regulations action get to hold off links to biscount office still involves regulations and the con counter plan. One perm do both shields politics no one cares there's a con happening 2 perm do counter plan 3 perm to the after the net benefit not interdictions to counterplan artificially adds delay 4 reject immunity fiat default to actor multi-level fiat bastardized literature and limits any hope of a deficits 5 courts circumvent they continue applying seagull size 2 courts for function under perpetuation of contribution contribution also determine consequences to use visit court will find 2 minute consequences taxation size diminish them 5 6 can't solve the courts rule on it before it hurts it's about the position of certainty 8 can't call it disrupts relations abroad it's also 92 confident leads to domestic political never Congress and confident and states of a controversy debate and poses a disruption of relations links to politics counterplan destroys legitimacy ABA 97 Congress and courts are not completely public confidence judiciary publishing conflict conflicts amendments and the opposition deliveral versus links to BISCON pharma confusing unprecedented in the act resources pick perm do both combining reservation and preservation components combining water resources creates our interactions with nature sustainable perm to the aft and the mindset of the counterplan avoids the 3 perm to the counterplan each point counterplans must keep your text and function that's best ensures net benefits or germane impact and fairness justifies permission sure function or testing intrinsic but not work 4 picks our voting issue moves to one issue by resulting in the plan infinitely regressive unfamiliar unpredictable irrelevant method C is education counterplans avoid substantive reason for narrowing debate onto minor distinctions 5 perm to the aft then the counterplans facing overrides that the aft economizing water and util are key to sustainability methods and 16 water critical boundaries suppressing 36 forward and sustainable water incoming water used again cost water can have real impact packing 1 perm do 2 perm do counterplan 8 resolve is inserted made Webster's 9 self consulted rate neither should also collaborative 99 south this matter should be because not be satisfied as desirable counterplans must compete via text and function that's best ensures net benefits or germane impact is fairness justifies permutations or function or text or intrinsic but not both the perm the United States Congress and executive action announced their support for announced to bring legal action under the substantial increase of protection of water resources in the United States the Supreme Court should in 16 decision reverse the action on the grounds that political branches lack sufficient discretion to modify water protection law. The House of Representatives and Senate should schedule a vote for expanding the Supreme Court by 4 justices permitted the AF and the House of Representatives and Senate should schedule expanding the Supreme Court by 4 justices reject counterplans that could fee out the AF Eastwest fairness still will lack predictability infinite regressive and can change in small process instead of engaging core substance protections topic education defaults to general means debates doesn't solve water exemptions only full Chevron analysis over ES is key and the counterplan muddies that analysis 6 it doesn't solve NEPA circuit court ambiguity only resolved by clear signal for services also isn't perceived internationally because it's a political signal not a fair one doesn't solve internal benefit it cannot spill over to all court packing they say no one has an incentive to pack the courts the states counterplan 1 perm do both the chose politics a diverse focus in the perm do counterplan 50 safe fiat is bad unrealistic fiats infinite actors estimates Afghan does recent court ruling dex state authority gats and bars 22 limited water calculation states and concentrate was condition to my federal storage and waters and county projects pollution ecosystem doesn't solve water exemptions court holds exclusive authority doesn't solve NEPA court resolution of circuit with Greenland's application of NEPA broadly links to the court politics of Wisconsin And if in case of follow into the court space decided as well, court clog 1, NEPA litigation already brought Burke, the 20 NEPA litigation turned approximately common change litigation of negligence of any question remained 2, clarifying the scope, decreases delays, CQ, 21, diligence of NEPA document can be consistent by 3, analysis agencies have decades of inspiration to consider effective effects agencies to consider avoid delays in NEPA used to be COVID, thumbs, coast closed and struggle to meet demand 4, coast clog now, McCarty, 419, not going back, it wasn't clear if it was being remotely, haven't got back in court, how we're going to provide access to the remote amount of people who don't have a relied internet connection, never conflict this connection to 5 alt causes parody 18 justice and increase capacity there are delays when you 400 cases on what Ben 400 cases in court docket. There's no way you can get 10% of those court systems become so backed up. There's only the integrity of the investigation and sacrifice procedure becoming time consuming. 6 courts empirically adapt Melix. 1490s battle court and crisis with regard to mass tort claims with little ovens courts have been overwhelmed. Judges have courts are capable of designating implementing case specific management programs to processing a large number of cases. Chevron just said 1 nil in courts though conduct NEPA they determine the NEPA evaluation arguments agencies will maintain application to permanently non-unique average criticisms of current APA standards. So worse we don't change those. No cyber infect Lewis 20 not say actually capacity people cost of action. They're not ensuring production US and unwilling to risk died from cyber cut the card. There are no season or 20 political conduct falls to humanity decides to unluckily to extinction cut the card. Net extinction the court politics is said environmental litigation times 420 legal changes NEPA filed numbers groups litigation 2 rulings inevitable 3 court won't remedy Benson 11 courts NEPA arbitrary standards cut the card standard vaccine mandate thumbs Roberts doesn't have control of Williams 12 1 card prepared to upload Mississippi Thomas Alito Gorsuch and Kavanaugh over Roberts' suggestion Mississippi not that overturning unclear numbers would be within conservative parenting were limited Roe is already dead they've already decided impact is not unique antitrust policies hurt business confidence 1 no linking needs for those 4-9 White House protect landmark law this is a commentary and NEPA regulation confirmation which for climate White House promises second regulations 2 clarifying scope solves TQ 21 build up NEPA talking consistent with their analysis the decades of experience considering effects and therefore NEPA review BISCON is low now Barker's working the inflation star conflicts low cut the credit low
Yeah, the timer went off before you started reading whatever that last card was.
okay
Give for cross X.
yeah
Okay, 3 minutes. So I'd like to talk about case really quick. The critical infrastructure stuff you said, it's not about grid, it's about flooding and dams. How does that cause extinction?
So our scenario is specific to flooding. It's in the context not only of dams preventing water from coming in, but also about the sustainability of broadly the ability to have access hydropower, etc.
Okay, why does that? Why do we need that?
These aging dams, yeah, I mean, our Pullman evidence indicates that the interconnectedness of systems means once one water supply framework goes down, the others do as well because they're interconnected. It's not only in dependence of water systems, which is hyper specific to, power grids is an internal link to that, but it's also insufficient. Okay. So basically people can't live if they don't have access to electricity, to a place to live, right? You need habitats.
I'm not sure the Hamlin evidence substantiates that. Advantage 2, you were it's a lack of NEPA credibility right now, doesn't produce meltdown technology or something. Could you explain that?
No, argument is that you need a regulation of these industries. So this not of the industries, of the NRC. So the NRC right now already has requirements for how it conducts nuclear tests and nuclear waste disposal. So there are 2 scenarios here. One is that nuclear plants are exempted right now from NEPA. This is specifically in the context of NRC government run, plants, et cetera, that are related to the industry, and says that without this licensing for safety requirements,
okay, why haven't
go down? In other words, they aren't enforcing it right now.
Why haven't meltdowns happened?
So it's about this. First is that we have a storage scenario specific to about the storage of nuclear waste, which is accumulating over time. But meltdowns broadly are not going to be implemented. We think that the risk increases as long as nuclear power plants are held open. The core meltdowns are inevitable right now until we find a safe way to deal with fuel.
When does it increase to such an extent?
We think that's pretty likely to happen quite soon. Our evidence substantiates that it's becoming more and more important as the court is abdicating its role even more. So it's a uniqueness argument that as regulations are being weakened, that it becomes more likely.
Sure. So radiation impact, what line in your 1AC evidence talks about extinction?
Yeah, let me see this. Our Morris evidence says that it could kill everyone on our planet. That's a quote from our evidence.
Hey, really quick,
The
what was the
nuclear
interp
waste
on?
could, quote, be enough to kill everyone on our planet.
Really quick, what was the interp on condo?
Dispo.
Thank you.
Okay, I have 5 seconds left.
652. Let me make sure that's right. Yeah, 652 starting. $314. I'm putting that in chat and sending. In chat. This is Octa's. It's sent. Is everybody good for an order? Oh, waiting, got it. Okay. The advantage counter plan, con, pick, process counter plan, states counter plan, advantage 1, advantage 2. Is everybody good? Still waiting.
Hang on a second.
Yeah.
The Twin doc is opening for me right now.
I'm good when everyone else is.
Ben, good. All right, looks like everyone's good. The counterbalance results better than the AF regs are doomed to fail, creating adaptive incentive-based structures best protect the environment, increase long-term sustainability via tech innovation. That's no big. They can see the internal benefit. Obviously, the 201 AR does not get any new answers. This is just a drop state where the band plank had no answer whatsoever, and all of that outweighs. One is magnitude. A host of complex interacting challenges are rapidly advancing. It means any traditional regulatory approach dooms us to extinction. Only better adaptation can solve. Two is scope tech innovation solves every expert state. This not going to impact even to this because the 1C evidence already said the word end civilization, which they said was the threshold for extinction. But I'll be this card to be safe after 18. We'll generally future people around extinction approaches generally trying to keep civilization running. We're going to be better prepared to make a lot of scientific progress if we harness innovators. And the turns case one is the counterplan regulation structurally enabled to solve the cases here. Two is the impact innovation solves the terminal via new tech. View the basic sufficiently if you solve enough the app, you'll need a warm server is going to benefit and she'll just kick it after the round if we lost it, including individual planks with the internal against case, even if the advantage counterplan planks don't solve the rest of the app. Now, first it's from the counterplan. It obviously severs we have banning regulations, which includes the app, which is a regulation. Even if they win the counter interpretation on T or any of the evidence, they still require a federal change, which they are. One, protection of water requires regulations. The government prohibition, no limitation. That's not incentive. Match 16. Water protection requires regulations that applies to death finding activities and use of water protection on a condition that water prohibition condition limitation, which defines the allowed impact on water system. Two, they've had a mandate with enforcement distinct from incentive. A, regulation must be binding, or back 16. Regulation legal and plans of intervention and regulations of executive regulations law that has the power to create a binding no legal norm. B, that's the opposite of substitute incentive. Helmer 97. In contrast to regulator, the economic incentives are less subsidies include tax incentive, tax credits, incentive credits, loans, standards. 3, 7 to voter incentivize the AF change the AF and 2, see parents and education. They perm do both fails. The counterplan is mutually exclusive. It bans command and control regulations that include the AF. If the perm somehow functions, it cannot solve then a benefit because inclusion of the AF would make flexible regulatory possible and policy impossible, and at least to any external benefit because it would still attack agency flexibility. Now, the Purdue combo flanks, it obviously fails. One, it does not solve the internal benefit because banning regs is key. The only thing that's B besides Purdue both is all the advantage counterplan planks does not solve the internal. 2 is it links to the external because it still includes the AV. And 3 is main tags the regs deck the solvency to trigger the net benefit. Actually, I'm going to skip that card. Even if they win some risk of shielding, they need a substantial deficit of that to win the risk of the link. Now, the advantage counterplan proper players, if they don't have evidence or don't have very good answers to most of the planks through the group of the first 2 arguments about why the AV is key, they do not assume our planks which solve the terminal impact. Maybe they do not solve the internal link, but that does not matter if they can overcome that by solving the impacts first. They say other projects don't adopt the plank. Financially incentivizes them to do so, which means it definitely would solve. There's no reason that financial wouldn't solve. Second, other way they drop the other plank, which is a space and a view, which means even if other countries not agree, the U.S. would still not do space war. They say space binding is unique. The terminal impact of space binding is just war. Other way, use segregation pro trust and disaggregation. Prevent attacks from occurring or escalating. Great, right 10. Particularly virtual goals that take by use international community reinforced arms against weapons and space and damaging satellite public fashion. Reduce the change attention to the use will not have to damage satellites. Good faith in reducing misconduct. This such a statement would not like the use and deposition of inferiority could avoid reactions by other countries of public pressure would have this capability from operations text means satellite plus attractive priorities reducing vulnerabilities redundancies and improving the capacity to rapidly constantly function developing because it's distributing satellites function among also reproducing satellites on the function of a regional basis by using packets as a shield and can be added to better sensitive force from against collision error and ground base packets could provide a military relevant time energy. The second is a food aid. They just said ag at ways because we would not have the food to aid, but they consider the other part of the plank, which is R&D, which means even if in the status quo we don't have enough, they would be able to R&D would solve by creating tech that solves water shortages, etc. That solves food shortages. Keep the team. You should double invest over the next 10 years. Public agencies will be game changing innovation to be transferred to Africa and South Asia. How much should consider Barbara's commission of to facilitate partnerships between universities and developing will climate change cannot innovate with a better data. U.S. should make nutrition a priority and finish reducing waste. Need a predictive to earth can use the change of research and level affiliate 2 billion by 20 use of global leadership is crucial to increase productivity, reduce food use for resource and topical climate change. Then they say damn upgrades are the key because we lack info. There's no reason info is key for also putting microbubbles over the ocean. This is the reason we don't solve the internal lake, but not the reason we don't solve the impact microbubbles solve. Morgan 11. This version of poly or microbubbles are not tax any physical risk given that they don't dissolve, they don't do lesser durable, can make much lower without civilization sphere. Potential water surface of particle to different polymers have a high scattering power, more than 42% of life return to the space use. Compared to current CO2 we don't need it for 90% of model issue, $1 billion reverse warming can offset warming. The next thing is they say, if the damn thing is classified to do with the grid thing, we also solve the grid terminal. They drop that too, but you can install NER 16. Defense detection turns out quickly identifying instructions and clear posture for limiting aggressive behavior, minimize intrusion defenders, threats of blazing lazy systems, authorized administration, first increase its info, second with the private sector lead. What's up to detect adversaries must be prepared to retaliate across the domain, insurance, and shaming and negates. The there will be consequences. Now the counter debate, we get what we did, especially against new affirmatives. 1 is neglect to CSF from multiple angles. 2 is real world policymakers consider multiple strategies to solve for something. 3 is advocacy skills and makes it better using different methods to advocate for something. 4 is top bias. There's tons of applet and no neglect on the top of the negs. These are the low ground thing. Yeah, 5 is win conditions. We just did with the apps. The idea 6 is have choice and bias. All they know the weakness of the app can overadapt the business can be better confidence, especially with the last speech. 7 is arbitrariness, imminent tiny theorem, something that makes you be a little bit clear fairness. You know it's something's caught up because they also clearly don't care about things like clash with the brick new. There's strat times using Neville reach short T and DHLs instead, which they cannot straight turn into, so it does not solve. Nobody knows what it means. We just add planks that force into perm theory links the links to BizCon stuff, but that's not the net benefit. In case I try to go for there's some double term between the disk that we're extending and this, there's no double term between them. Both say regulatory flex is key. We've said that command and control also hurts regulatory flexibility, but they not turn each other. Other way, no argument like that was in the 2UC, so no good new ones. Con, perm, not going for it. That 3 arg was arg not team, especially new AF. Pick, arg not team, not going for it. Press kind of blend, arg not team, not going for it. States, arg not team, not going for it. Advantage 1. First at the top, climate does not cause extinction. Scientific consensus. Kerr, AL19. High likelihood of views of the coming in services report on truth unlikely worst case scenario that even on direct outcomes are equivalent to annihilation of like conclusion humans legislation and its false majority science is not helpful unless the process takes a long time. The essential purpose of the low circulation of the conclusion drawn from rigorous assessment. Their climate models are bad. Convention consensus. Piper machine. Larger chance of extreme degrees of warming. If it's also simplistic modeling the right protection of method, they should be larger even if any reason not really cause that's money analysis of climate change. The death of billion and extinctions interchangeable climate change is irrelevant. Climate warming doesn't cause adaptation. Solved. Factor L17. Like warming very likely cause extinction versus 7 the low probability of extinction. Also say with confidence will be severe enough time to is able to adapt to avoid extinction. Now the grid is resilient. All they say is not just about the grid, but also energy writ large. Terminal impact of that is grid resilience because they say that local class maybe flooding happens, but our evidence says the grid is still able to come back in a matter of hours, and even cyber attacks, which obviously outweigh flooding, cannot make it down long term. No blackout. Larson 18. Who's still not about to go and say hackers called blackouts groups and not demonstrate capability of resilient technical targeted operation and operators would not the blackouts operation not effectively scaling up is unlikely. Even hacked outages only take hours to get back in because of built-in resiliency. Units and neighboring lose 17. Okay, so we have good cybersecurity grid available for reliability safety portion of the grid goes down. We're good at moving away from computers and working the infrastructure to get back. Usually cyber never within a week. Cyber attacks deal with computer technology when they target it that way. Tracking hours good. Fine. Fisher 15. Electrical reliability is excellent. Consumers not by 70% region wide blackouts extra characterized through Windows underrated and your secret remains able to perform reliability of a variety of conditions. The food wars, yes, it does lead to it does not lead to extinction. All they say is it doesn't acute insecurity like hotspots. Yes, it tells our evidence that the people are not able to fight when they are not able to feed their country. One, how was it in the first place? But two, how the leaders are forced to turn inwards because they're worried about domestic political popularity and they know wars would hurt that food doesn't escalate. Best be all 18. They'll scully mayor that a production access to food will increase the probability that will bring up the people on the conservation on the position of resort to balance targeted long less emission refuge getting rates to lower the risk of conflict. Saying the words North Korea, ISIS, and Iran does not answer the castle lower in the system because he's a hack for the food industry, but never says or explains in any way how those all escalate because of food shortages. Advantage 2. There's no radiation or meltdowns impact. First, they said that we lack ability to protect them in the status quo because of lack of regulatory framework. Okay, but that does not mean they cause extinction. Our second submission now does not mean one is they consider Chernobyl, Fukushima, all thrown, but those huge meltdowns way bigger than anything the U.S. could possibly see to not cause extinction. There's no explanation. They didn't even go past the borders of the country, which proves there's no chance. How does everybody in the world die because of a localized meltdown? Either way, no meltdown. Rapier 18, 19. Could Chernobyl happen to know that accidents are mitigated, learn the probability of ensuring a response to design modification and potential reduce as a result of design change and probability of reduces here for Chernobyl, Fukushima, cause identified addressing no subjects, they cannot cause a catastrophe lens, no meltdown impact and evacuation solved. Kaiser 11. There's the large nuclear study work in the Sandy lab, the various protection, how quickly see some good release or meltdown, eventual blackout over 100 points per study to computer models, engineering analysis, energy can leave the meltdown deleted far beyond 1% of the code escape. One person know every 4,348 within 10 models would develop counter plenty of evacuation accidents per slowly. There's no testing impact. They can say they're not doing it in the status quo. The evidence says they could do it, but no evidence says they want to. They did maybe during the Cold War, but no evidence says they're doing it now. It's too late for the new answers. There's not space where they say mining is unique. No, it still says there would not be war. There's not no scenario for miscalculation, which is the only word they have for, the only word they have for mining being unique. And either way, there's no incentive because people know that ASAP stuff is uniquely destabilizing. The vested interest in space security would lose economically. No arms racing. 17. I'm still looking at skills pressure on USA tolerant and stabilizing ways such as surveillance that both factors restrain other appreciate all this temperature high mutual self-restraint has been effective agreements evidence on the war and mitigating arms races of the actors will be determined because of independent knowledge of relevant territorial wealth is difficult to envision any national gain interference until they extend to as a weapon mutual assurance access to burn no escalation. One. Politically in the bombing times embassy through the 10 ranks and not escalate the world survival like crazy human crisis diarrhea air or diplomacy when the day war would space be any different. Control F space be any different to see where that was marked. I'm good.
All right, give me my timer. Okay. Your key evidence indicates that it should double investments into other countries and help meet other countries' needs in terms of producing agriculture. How does this resolve? How does this resolve?
So, like, how does this
global insecurity?
Yeah,
when they're dependent on U.S. markets, at least.
It says you're right. It says that. It also says in the U.S. things like universities, etc. We should invest R&D too. You've answered the second part of a plank, the food aid plank.
Okay.
You've conceded the part that's just like innovation will solve for the reasons like resource shortage or water shortages, etc.
Okay, so this is based off resolving water shortages.
We think any
yeah.
internal link you have to ag, innovate, or R&D investment in agriculture would solve that internal link. Whatever.
Okay. Could you explain how increasing research and development in agriculture makes our crops able to withstand, environmental degradation and dams?
Yeah, sure. It could look like doing things like increase investment in scaling up aquaponics, so they can be grown indoors without like necessary need for soil. They can reuse the water versus
But
recirculating.
what evidence says that's going to be scaled up at a sufficient scale,
Well,
like fast enough to resolve it?
We've read a card that says that R&D would solve kind of exports, which is like your scenario, because like, we need exports, would lead to more exports. Like coupling that with food aid would lead to global stability from conflict. We've read that evidence. You've not read evidence.
Okay. The command and control stuff, what your budget evidence, it says that water protection systems, and then says requires government regulations, but it goes on to say that like this is a basis for what they think it should be like. Why is this a definition, not just a normative statement of the author's opinion of water protection looks like?
So the sentence is water protection not only requires regulation, but clearly defined functions. It literally says the word water protection requires regulation. Like, I don't even get where you think
this is someone who is a member of the Serbian Institute for Economic Science and International Academy of Management and Technology. Why is this a legal definition talking about the United States?
So a couple arguments. First, we think it's good for us to be able to get competition off things like this. Second, like debatability way is obviously all that. But second, I think that in the context of definitions, intent to define and exact resolution wording probably comes first. The reasoning being, when someone Googles, like, if I'm at the start of the year, I'm trying to like figure out what the topic is like. I don't Google like, set.gov and then do water protection. I just do like in quotes the wording of the resolution. So that should be prioritized.
Okay.
Over, like,
are command and control regulations the only kind of regulations?
Probably not. We ban command and control if that's what the text says.
Okay, so why is the plan like why does your evidence say that other kinds of regulations that are not command and control regulations
the
cannot
Orbeck
be water
evidence
protection?
Explains kind of the violation and why we exclude the AF. I shouldn't say violation, why it's mutually exclusive.
Sending it out now. Okay. It's sent. Are people good for an order? Yeah, okay. It'll be court clog, court politics, BizCon, then the agency / I think they called it Chevron dissent.
Can you get that again?
Yeah. Court clog, court politics, BizCon, the agency dissent. Is anyone not ready? Awesome. Minutes. Court clog. I didn't read it in the one I see. They asked in cross text what I skipped on case, not on the off. Either way, they don't have offense because they read defense to it and didn't have a terminal impact on court politics. You see all the defense, including the thumpers, prove the plan has no impact, and if it does, other things cause the switch inevitably on BizCon. I'm kicking it. They don't have offense. One conceded uniqueness that BizCon is high now. They read a thumper, but the evidence doesn't say that lower BizCon means that they don't have uniqueness for the link turn to the NEPA thumper. They read proof that the plan wouldn't have any effect on BizCon. Agency dissent. Effective regulation is the only way to remain adaptive to incoming acts of risk, bioterror, nuclear war, and environmental destruction. Collier says all of modern life requires a government that's willing and able to protect its citizenry. Innovation solves extinction, pandemics, asteroids, volcanoes. Innovation is a diffuse extended risk shield. While it may not have some obvious destructive scenarios, it makes humanity better equipped for and ready to regulate incoming threats. Matthews 18. Cross-apply that evidence from the kind of plan outweighs on magnitude, improving lives for those in the future outweighs the people present who constitute less than 1.1% of the human population, and turns case impact evidence, power systems, terror, accidents, etc., and key to broader safety and avoid deterrence generally. And the link turns big case because it means that we wouldn't be able to implement NEPA effectively. The line by line 2AC1 link evidence, not that the court would enforce NEPA, but the plan would force agencies to justify their actions to the court and prove that they are complying with NEPA, because that's the only mechanism through which that they can enforce that agencies would comply with NEPA and close those exemptions. That's unworkable. The one in Gerson evidence says that the courts are incapable of sifting through that evidence, and especially when it's scientific evidence, which is what NEPA relies on, since it's environmental law, judicial requirement that agency consider scientific as address regulatory coherence, ensuring an effective policy administration. Watts 16 expertise forcing to force regulators exercise expert judgment fails to consider the role political influence play, and it adheres to outmoded notions of agencies of a political issue to standardize the tension between experts and holding value-based judgment must be made in the face of scientific uncertainty, completing profit does inevitably come into play. Agencies make decisions about policy making on everything from the environment, health, space, scientific uncertainty, scholars justify power to make important policy decisions by emphasizing agencies that are accountable to Congress. We justify the fact that political branches are control of agency has control for their regulatory coherence and agency decision-making expertise, forcing judges to survive political influence on the ground, protected from oversight, inability turns key signs, standards push policy choices underground, making agencies less accountable. Watts 16 agencies suffered signs of reach for further outcomes. They were able to had policy choices to inform their scientific standards and expertise, forcing model would undermine these incentivized agencies. Sweep choices under the rug. Expertise forcing would cause harm by pushing policy leading choices underground where they cannot be subject to scrutiny of an oversight. Exercise effective scientific review standards are impossible. Internet judicial second guessing shuts down all agency policy making. Verse 16 agencies with choice a particular option and necessary arbitrary and judicial which be typical laws of the court itself takes there as extra constitutional proceeding. Agencies again counted out problems with frontiers of science technology is that expert probability seems are unreliable or when agencies favor regulatory choice premise on guesses they face should develop probability of assessment of lack of respectable foundation right card after foundations 2AC2 we have uniqueness they don't have cards here are ours first internal disagreements between six and of justice ensure the administrative state is safe neither West Virginia nor identification will imperil agency rulemaking prefer and recent evidence that's like comprehensive nonpartisan consensus Clinton 419 the court's decision some experts have warned the death for not defense West Virginia appears constitutional is suspending the ideological perspective what the court will use as a non-delegation question strike down rules. The six are evenly divided. How certain regulators Roberts, Kavanaugh, and Barrett did not join Lucy's Gorsuch, Alito, and Thomas. The mandate that has been struck. There are uneven votes on the conservative court to dismantle the admin safe and during their evidence old and speculative. And that's Hurwitz 21. The Supreme Court's holding on Prometheus a restatement of basic admin law. The agency acts as reasonable to the strong reaffirmation fraud difference agencies including changing politics core held so long as the agency can act within its own reasonable this affirmation agencies freedom and health decisions reminder that the change of restrain judicial review every federal circuit court refused to impose a strong scientific review requirements on agency actions. The plan flips that coon 16 when reviewing scientific decisions based on agency expertise standards practice cause looks like it's to afford deficits unless it's shown the agency ignored scientific data the practice leaves little recourse to hold the agency accountable for substantiating its decision as it stands not the requirements satisfied as long as the agency considers available data the agency is free to disagree discredit and align weak data as long as the agency communicates justification for it will not be reviewed by the court. The 2AC3 not just cyber and disease caused by the overview and victims constitution till 17 it's only a matter of time before pendants will correct the agency because the agency can be deep in vulnerability. We also face novel mission of the that is spreading no faster than 4 new nuclear weapons dead list responses fragmented from the unifying thought to WHO so goodwill international action not if you local dynamics of the US lady here will give better the next on par with conversation despite COVID-19 disease cause taking order 20 pandemic cause and if humanity COVID close res but next pandemic world has become an flu spread remote Pacific Island chance of human exchange and low risks have changed population thousands of good from practice speed animals close to human sensitive people long distance transport we brothers work now work with them pretty every different age different new genes increase acceptance with lethality resistance vaccination threaten global catastrophe.
That's March global catastrophe.
Yep.
Okay. 216, the my sending it out. Theater is going to be advantage 1, advantage 2. Wait. Let me just move this. The advantage counter plan. And then the decide. Is everyone good?
I haven't gotten the doc yet.
No, you sent the doc, right?
I just got it. Let me download.
Oh, perfect.
All my docs this week and take a minute to open. So. Okay, thank you.
Okay. I'll get started in a few seconds. Okay. The best the evidence is assume the magnitude of the internal link. Other countries are interdependent in the United States, which guarantees that there's no pre-experts determine the desirability of instability, especially in developing the countries. Is empirically proven. FBI the 12 ultimately, but over lack of research, Germany's World War II FSR inspired by anything food scale would be significantly greater. People hungry, the state is less stable. Regions ranch reports follow credible scenario for World War II faster. The chain of research conflicts, the increased food security result in conflict for run Eritrea in the Balkans, the wars you can ministry of defense, CIA, CSIS, and he also identified feminist trigger for nuclear war, the Cass law. The evidence is better than the best evidence, at least, because it states hotspots and explains exactly why it is key, since they're reliant on U.S. exports as an expert in national security, which makes them qualified to talk about these things. Advantage to resource. This resource scarcity in space outweighs any sort of interest in space security or independence. It means that other countries are willing to put their foot in the doors for the when they see internal link evidence. That means that they're racing towards space finding because of the massive wealth that's accrued, which puts them before any interest in other states. The risk of miscalculation is possible. Their evidence comes from 2001 does not assume the Roberts evidence from 2017 indicates that especially problematic and given a lack of the regulations. We don't have to win the arms race, which is the conflict would spill over, not only knocking out satellites, but preventing the ability to detect things like ICBMs and cause interstate conflict. Counterfeit. The permutation solves. You should evaluate both of them through yes or no. The lack of an internal link distinction between the lack of an internal link distinction means that there's no way to win links less. Permutation to both. Frame it through normal means there's no way you could interpret NEPA in the app to say command and control, because the app is about federal infrastructure project that allows you to ban all. It allows you to ban all command and control regulations, while the affirmative simultaneously cures, since the affirmative is not a command and control. The regulation that guarantees it solves that benefit because it ensures that private industry is not subject to any command and control. The regulations when the affirmative is about federal projects. Further, the counterplan, if we win the FTC, we win the definition to make for this become evidence. It says preventing harm, which is what incentives could result in. It doesn't have to be regulations to come 10 for classify the EP evidence. It says safeguard from the harm, which is exactly what incentives do. It doesn't have to be regulations. 10 for water, but to protect the attribute and resources means to regulate or prevent the conflicting uses from affecting the resources, which the incentives, this is incentivized command and control regulates the industry. We don't do that principle of economics, and the command and control regulation requires that firms increase their cost by installing anti-pollution equipment. If firms have this, they're required to take the social cost of pollution into account. Their evidence is the only evidence in the context of domestic environmental protection. They've conceded all of our standards versus the precision. Their evidence is from Serbia. The other evidence was destroyed in 1SC cross-text when it defines regulation as meaning regulation rather than protection as meaning the regulation. We access all the rest of the wording offense, but they over-limit the guarantee that acts like federal dams, public trust and other affirmatives get limited out of the topic. Now they do not solve versus agriculture. Their two influence A is flooding, dam collapse wrecks the crops because they're key. The control of irrigation, which goes both ways, over irrigation and under irrigation. B is water reservoirs. They're key to the guarantee. A
a source of water to ensure that irrigation can access the crops. The solvency card, we know it. Tyler cut it. It's about food waste and nutrition. The fake solvency claim does not rise to the threshold of it's saying does not rise to the threshold of in a world where there's no reservoir to gather water because all the dams are not able to accumulate that water. They would be able to they would be able to get access to the water. At worst, innovation cannot solve. They have not isolated any specific innovations or how those would reduce the water use, which means that best, but there's no result of that as for the key evidence. Two is space. Unilateral NFU would be disastrous and send countries into aggressive mode. They know the United States is not going to fight back. At worst, the U.S. would second strike retaliatorily after a perception of weakness when other countries are taking the resources that they believe is theirs. Chevron, or the administrative state dissent. The affirmative outweighs. The dissent is linear and uncertain about spillover beyond NEPA, but there's a break for our impacts alone. Our impacts come first. They are the only one where the United States is key and can guarantee solvency internationally, i.e., food exports, and the space war in which the United States can ensure stability. But the administrative state cannot solve their impacts at an international level in disease, etc., which means that international crises are inevitable in the world of the dissent. Now, they read an APA impact, and the affirmative does not change that. There's no link. Their link is about the courts having to decide environmental and scientific issues. The agencies would be deciding that under the world of the affirmative because the regulatory statute is inevitable insofar as they are bound by NEPA. The court simply applies that and requires them to conduct NEPA, but does not require the court to decide the questions of whether they have determined the scientific standard. They do not trump case because NEPA can be determined by agency and the standards by the courts, but the one in our uniqueness evidence just proves the thumper because the one in T car was about how disastrous the APA arbitrary and capricious standard is. At worst, that thumps because the affirmative is definitely a smaller change to the APA, and obviously it's not. The administrative state is not destroyed.
Crap, it's 3:14. Starting. Everyone hearing good? Let me wait for, okay, there. DA, counterplan, advantage 1, 2. Okay. Everybody good? Great. Conceding the impact debate and turns case means they must go for the no link. Any risk of a link means we win the debate, especially because they conceded uniqueness, etc. First is the impact debate. Even if they win, the whole rant about being localized in the U.S. is new, but it's false. One, the Dylan evidence on the pandemic impact, which goes conceded says the U.S. is specifically key. Read it after the round, which solves any of their framing up. But second is the Matthews evidence says it leads to innovation writ large. That innovation would lead to new tech, which would be adopted anywhere. Obviously, other countries have an incentive to build tech. If it's just better, all of this is so new. You should strike all of it. And they've conceded all the impact magnitude. One is that innovation solves the terminal impact. Things like ag, etc. will be solved by innovation in the long run as long as we're able to stay alive in the short term. They also conceded a framing issue about scope, how a host of conflict of external threats outweigh any one individual, and only innovation can solve all of them. They've also seen the turns case. It was carded. One is the Watts evidence, which says that they force regular agencies to go underground, which one makes them less effective, and two means that they cannot solve things like water shortage, etc. Because instead of doing bigger, broader regs, so what they're trying to solve for, agencies will try to shield away, do things like guidance instead, so they don't get reviewed by the court, which is less binding, means they cannot solve any of the after impacts called conceded. It's the ailems of the COG. You cannot let me lose on a new two-year argument and end our high school career on that now. The UST evidence, or first is the no link evidence. They must go for this, but there are a couple of framing issues that frame the link debate. One is we have evidence they don't. Two is that we have made a linear framing claim that more flexibility is better. The more the agency administrative state is able to regulate things, is that better, which means any risk of decrease means you win. But the third is that uniqueness shapes the length. They've conceded such good evidence on how there's a ton of deference now. The Kuhn evidence, 16 evidence says all circuit courts are giving broad flexibility, will not dare touch any scientific decision whatsoever on the regular agencies make, which means that frames even the link debate. Now the evidence, one is they're saying they're not scientist review. Our evidence assumes that, but first they're wrong. The Robish evidence, the solvency card says, quote, the court should take Chevron, should tweak Chevron to add a full step one analysis. They highlighted that should be a full analysis, and they say this has, quote, bypasses rigorous judicial review, all which proves they subject agency decisions to more rigorous review. It does not matter if it's exactly fact-finding, etc., because all our evidence says the only ones who are capable of knowing if a decision is good or bad are the agencies. Now, our link is not saying that the courts are the ones who are making agencies or making the rules or anything like that. Obviously, we don't think that. Instead, it's saying they might strike down just an objectively good regulation because they don't understand the science and are like, oh, well, I don't think it meets the threshold, which means we don't have to win anything about like Roberts being the one that makes it, which is the no link they're trying to go for. The Gerson evidence is the best evidence on the round. They have none. We have some. It's specific. This kind of standard says expanding things. The second evidence is the Watts evidence. The side of the turn case is also the Watts evidence above says a lot of juice does look like regulation go here. It leads to even if some regulations get better, they get worse in the overtime, and it leads to patchwork, etc. All of which they can't solve. All the turn case can continue to prove. They say uniqueness proves the thumper proves the uniqueness stuff. I have no idea what thumper this is. It might be the cross-line the thumper thing from the BizCon flow. If it is that, there's obviously no reason to thumb this because our evidence says that card's about business competence. They consider that it does not apply to the flow at all. If it's just the APA weren't they in the status quo, the only thing, or they made in the tweet, they just said non-unique. We don't change the APA. Saying the words arbitrary and capricious does not move the APA too hard. Now we have red cards that the course endlessly defer. Changing the APA is not the link, and there's no reason the APA disproves the link when they have no evidence on it. They missed the forest for the trees. I'm not going to go for the plank that bans the app. I'm just going to go for the advantage counterplan plank so you can see the judge kick and that I can kick plank, so it's totally legitimate. One, if we lose the judge kick at the counterplan, the disset alone should be enough to win. I'm just doing this to be safe and sufficiency framing. As long as we solve enough, it's solved. Now, Prindy both obviously links to the benefit. That one conceded. They answer why it doesn't link to the internal, but didn't answer why it doesn't link to external. Prindy counterplan. If yes, way more than the app because of all the other planks, obviously they consider determines the voting issue, fairness, etc. Makes it impossible to be affirmative, negative, and lets them change the affirmative. Now, the ag stuff. It's all one is we have evidence they don't. They could have read one of our evidence. It would have been fine, but they did not do so. One is they did our evidence. They said Tyler cut it. Thanks, but the card is just good. It says that it solves search of innovation. One is you can consolidate all the Matthews card that says innovation solves the truths you should. They say we have no specific examples, but things like aquaponics prove they can do less water use. They do not have to be immediate. They say dam collapse is key, but there's no reason that innovation could not solve things like dam collapse. That increase in R&D could do things like strengthening dams, etc. All of which solves the impact. It means all of which solves the impact. The second thing is the space scenario. First, they've conceded the evidence. They say it incentivizes other teams to strike. They drop the Grego and Wright evidence, which says that it leads to trust mutually. This analytic was totally unwarranted, etc. And you should not just give them to when we read a card that says the mutual trust. Otherwise, they drop the second plank, which is that we incentivize people to join on because we literally pay them to do a mutual framework, which definitely solves though deficit. If there is small versus deficit, sufficient framing obviously means it outweighs. Perm or advantage one. If you judge kick the counterplan, the case still outweighs. One is relative contestation. As long as they say words on the flow, we have one because they can see the impact answers case. But two is that their evidence is not that good. One, they read the new FDI evidence because they know the cast law is bad, but the FDI evidence is not any better. They say the word one, there's no explanation how they've considered a few key warrants. Is that countries are forced to turn inwards, not outwards. They know that their domestic political pressure is threatened. They know that worrying outwards look bad. Also, they can see there's no way to fight. You are not able to feed your people. Who are you sending to war? They're going to be starving on the battlefield. It means the war will escalate. They can see that the cast law card saying things like ISIS and North Korea does not mean this instability. How does U.S. agriculture solve North Korea nuking us? It makes absolutely no sense. They've not explained it in a way that makes sense. Hassel being better is wrong. They've seen the indict that he is a hack from the industry who obviously wants to indict. They also entered the best evidence, but dropped the cliff card, which says who does not lead to war. I gave the error warrants above advantage to the hollow evidence solves of this. There's not going to be a space where they can see the diplomacy warrant, which the 2 and C evidence. The diplomacy solves this as goes to solve. They say the card is old, but we read 1 C evidence from 2016, so there's no reason you should show the evidence on recency. It says that there's no incentive mining. It's not unique. There's no explanation. There's no miscalculation. Everyone has broad interest in maintaining the goals, maintaining space stability because they know that their satellites being taken down would be bad. The Troyar has to be new to win this round. They have to go for a no lane. The advantage kind of blend solves too much, and we just have recut their evidence. They're trying to recharacterize the app, which you shouldn't let them do.
216.
The order is going to be the first advantage, water exemptions, the second advantage, the counterplan, and the decide. Is everyone good? Great. Imminent MCOS guarantees extinction. They conceded the irrigation fails, and there's no way to even grow any crops without the stable dam. That is the technical concession. This internal link to us is about dams conceding. Irrigation doesn't matter in the context of the counterpan frame. All other things about farms becoming more efficient to whether or not they'll get water and be able to get anything in the first place. Whether or not the food wars happened now should frame the rest of the debate. Food wars cause extinction. Evidence indicates even if they turn inward, that civil war is so large and at such a scale that it draws in external actors. 2 warrants for this. First is the other countries will seize on the opportunity to steal food and get because resource shortages makes people desperate, which overcomes any of the stretches they're talking about. People not having the food to fight doesn't matter. They have enough. It's a matter of life and death. Whether they're going to do sit on their backs and do nothing or try their best to get food, which is why our Cook's Task Evidence as well as the FDR evidence statistics and food global estimates, the most senior institutions, the CIA, the UK, and intelligence organizations that conclude that the risk of food wars is correct and empirically proven. Now, the specific hotspots that have dropped: Iran, North Korea, and ISIS, all extreme factions. The Tuna's warrants about desperation that are wrong. Innovation that doesn't work. Tesla is not an industry hack. He sets examples and empirics about how what he said 1 to 1 historically, the French Revolution, other revolutionary wars, and desperation. U.S. ag does access North Korea. Evidence indicates that U.S. ag exports are dependent on developing countries are all competing with North Korea right now, which answers all their defense. The second advantage. I'm not going for Space Wars concede no impact, the counterpoint. There is no way to get water. All the innovation fears, the warriors, the tuners, the analysis of the counterpoint was that extending their food are aid and innovation plans. Look at the piece of evidence. First, the part of it says that we become more efficient because those farms that are already producing the food will now have increased access to all of those things because they'll become able to increase their food production. But your question you should ask yourself is, how are you going to increase food production if we don't have the most important thing that's necessary to even make the food in the first place, i.e. water, which only dam collapse has access to? Now, the food wastage stuff, sure, it might make us more efficient here, but it doesn't matter if the exporting isn't possible. And no one's going to start eating more within their own homes so other countries can have access to food. This is why our internal link is so important here. It's about the ability of the United States to export food to other markets, and those markets having a stable supply there. Any fluctuations is important here, which should improve the magnitude of the deficit. The one-year explanation that is not solving international impact calc, not the impact defense. We fundamentally have a warrant for why U.S. ag is key. They don't have a U.S. ag and state key. The 2NR sounds good and confident, but is massively overselling the quality of their evidence. The 1NC impact card does not make the U.S. pandemics key warrant, just as the U.S. agencies can do those things, but not that it solves at the level of international threats. No tech sharing warrant, it's uncarded. There's also no impact uniqueness in the 2NR insofar as the inter-administrative state can solve things like pandemics, but there's no warrant to these threats coming now in the first place, which is terminal uniqueness defense. But two things you should look to here. First is that the courts do not conduct the NEPA analysis. They have read 0 pieces of evidence about how NEPA or how changing the NEPA process would involve the courts in any way in which they are not involved right now. Ask yourself, what determination will the court be making by the basis of science? If you're not able to explain this, you are pulling quotes from the 1AC, then which the 2NR was not able to do beyond just saying Chevron, then you cannot go negative here. Now we'll explain that they go for this dubious link thing about how we use Chevron deference. They don't understand what step 2 of Chevron is in the first place. The way step 2 works is that if the intent of Congress is unambiguous, then it moves forward. But if the intent of Congress is unclear, then only you go on to whether or not the agency is following that. There isn't arbitrary or capricious, which is APA analysis. The Administrative Procedure Act is completely distinct from Chevron analysis, which is what their evidence is predicated off. First is that the courts do not conduct their determinants of NEPA exemption arguments. Agencies will apply NEPA themselves, which means that agencies are conducting NEPA analysis. The court will not say whether the analysis works correct in terms of the scientific justifications by considering the literal facts of the matter and having testimony from scientists. That's the agency's job. The court just says whether or not they did yes or no. Two is that it's not unique there. You've read multiple pieces of points of whether evidence criticizes current EPA standards, or you haven't read uniqueness for their impact in the first place. Their evidence is hyper-specific to how current arbitrary and capricious standards are allowing agencies, its courts, to decide scientific issues, which is bad. Look, they do not have a dissad here because the APA does not mandate that. The EPA already mandates the involvement, and the AF does not involve agency courts with science at all.
Good round, y'all. We'll get a card.
Good debate.
Good debate.
Ned Carduck assent.
I have Carduck assent.
I think we have a decision.
Yeah, I just voted. Shree, do you want to do the thing?
Sure. Yeah, everybody's here. Congratulations on making it to the dockets. Great debate. I enjoyed escaping Clash Hell. The decision is a 3-0 for the negative from Walter Payton. So the short of it for me is that the AF's food impact is largely deleted by the advantage counterplan. The agency DA outweighs the marginal benefit of maintaining irrigation dams in the US. So I thought the advantage counterplan solves the internal links to the food impact better than the case. The Castellaw card describes foreign hotspots in relation to like ISIS and North Korea, which has a tenuous internal link to NEPA review of domestic irrigation dams, which would only affect US food supply. The counterplan would increase R&D and food aid abroad, which would more approximately solve food shortage hotspots. And they also say it independently enables innovation to patch up the irrigation dams in the US and abroad, which is substantiated by this 2 and Keith evidence. The push that's like you can't grow crops without water seems to be geographically confined to the borders of the US. And at the end of the debate, it's unclear why the US is key, which is, I think, a missing part of that solvency push. Given how much of the case the counterplan solves, I think the only possible F ballot is like presumption, like on basically no link. I don't think the 1AR and 2AR gets there first. I think there's a few technical framing things in the 2NR that aren't explicitly responded to, in particular, the argument that more flexibility is better and that uniqueness controls the direction of the links, as there's a ton of court deference to agencies now. Second, the 1AR and 2AR sort of repeats this argument that courts don't conduct NEPA analysis, agencies still decide those scientific issues, and that there are existing rules regarding the APA. While that might be true and does mitigate the link, I ended up thinking a full step 1 analysis would still somewhat hamper agency flexibility, which is sort of the litmus test established by the neg. The Robish card that you have in the 1AC says the plan would reinstate rigorous judicial review, which would have the authority to decide whether the classification is ambiguous, which would constrain agencies from picking and choosing which statutes they want to comply with. I think some link, connects to sort of this bigger pandemics impact argument and the sort of like innovation impact filter, and it outweighs mitigated case.
I can go unless, Harry, you want to. Yeah, I don't disagree with anything Shree said. I saw the debate very similarly. I think the decided risk is low-ish just because the cards don't really say anything on either side that I understood as like a beefy kind of like real substantial link argument that I could really describe. What I do think is true of the link is just like Shree said, that there's a full step 1 Chevron analysis involved in NEPA stuff. I think that really like what hurts is the AF doesn't really have an answer to Turn's case. Like if I think that the court is at all more skeptical of agency actions after the AF, which I think it certainly is, even though I couldn't like precisely describe exactly what that means, that pushes agency actions to be less accountable, guidance document reliance, et cetera, which is, bad for AF impact. So I think that like that cuts against the solvency for the case, as well as just making regs less effective, which bolsters the neg impact thing. And yeah, I think that, the food impact is solved a lot by the counterplan, even if not perfectly. And there was kind of like a just, logical reduction of the AF food impact because like, yeah, what are we going to do about North Korea with corn? Like I get it that these are the impact cards that debate has given us, and you're doing well spinning what you can with this evidence set. But I also thought the 1AC was like not, as robust as I think you wanted it to be on just like US exports are key, like dams are key, those kind of things. Like it's just, I am very old and very grumpy about highlighting. And I just felt like a lot of the AF cards in the 1AC were just, highlighted to just not say a ton. And when this is the debate, and this is the type of debate where that kind of thing can really matter a lot in terms of like how much case defense reduces your impact versus how much it doesn't. And so if the 1AC just had like a couple fewer scenarios and a couple of beefier cards, that's one thing that could really help in a debate like this, I think, just because it wasn't, like if you had kind of more robust solvency cards that described exactly what standard the AF did impose, and then you could exclude a lot of these vague neg link arguments about court review with like more, and give the judges more confidence in that, that would make it way easier for us to conclude like, yeah, this disad is actually 0 and there's some risk that, the counterplan solves food less or whatever. But yeah, as it was, I just, but that's what I got. I won't belabor the point. I'll let Harry talk and then happy to answer questions.
I thought this was a really good debate. Oh, I froze for a second. I thought this was a great debate. I liked the impetus behind the AF. I thought it was cool, and the next shot was awesome. Like everyone executed really well. So I hope, like you all should be very proud of how you debated. The link was big enough to outweigh the case. I think that I agree with the general sentiment that I like the link argument, like the link evidence didn't really say much, and the like explanation and application of AF evidence that you were trying to use as no link stuff didn't say stuff as well. So it was kind of just like had a lot to do with spin, but I thought that the couple of framing issues that were really important, one, the one that Shri already mentioned of sort of like linear risk, the better, more flexibility, the better. And I thought that your attempt to re-explain the AF as like maximum flexibility was like clever, and I get where you were going with it, but at the same time, like the way you were explaining some of the uniqueness stuff and what your solvency evidence said about Chevron made it clear that like you certainly are a step in the opposite direction that the DISAD wants. You increase court scrutiny and like decision making over NEPA, or like, and when NEPA has to be applied and stuff like that. And so I thought that like they were clearly winning, that like you do decrease the amount of agency flexibility. I also think that they, had decent enough uniqueness cards, especially given that you didn't really have much game on like whether the degree to which deference is happening now, independent of NEPA issues in particular. And so that was kind of controlling the framing of some of the uniqueness issues itself, and like how much I cared or worried about the link, such that I thought that you would constrain agency flexibility. In terms of the relative risk of the case, I don't know that I necessarily thought that like the neg execution or evidence rose to the level of that it solved better than the AF, but I do think that it's certainly sufficient to like heavily mitigate a lot of the food wars stuff. In particular, I don't think any of your evidence rose to the level of saying that just like all water ceases such that there would be a collapse. Instead, it's more about improving efficiency of production, which happens to unfortunately like dovetail really well with the 2NR explanation and evidence about the R&D component of the plank improving efficiency such that we'd be able to, like produce more with less water, for instance, and things like that, such that like there was just very little risk that type of innovation would not be sufficient. But having said that, I don't think that it was 0 or anything. I don't think that it's like the counterplan's conclusively better than the AF. I just don't think that. I think that they have similar inroads into innovation that would be sufficient. I also think that the disease stuff, just to mention some things that like haven't necessarily been fully harped on, like I don't think the 1AR had a super on point answer to that, and that gives them somewhat of a more concrete external scenario. I don't think their evidence was like good enough on innovation in the terms of the DA itself, but the turns case explanation in the block and in the 2NR was really good. And I think like better framed than the 2AR in terms of whether this like theoretical idea of agency innovation would solve. So like, even if there are issues with the counterplan, I think like the DA itself and like a more flexible administrative state is better for the type of innovation that would produce a food war. There's some like marginal stuff about impact defense in terms of like, do countries turn inwards, et cetera, that I thought the NEC was doing a decent job of. But that was ultimately like secondary, given that I thought that the counterplan accessed enough of the external impact.
Walter Payton, you can ask questions first if you've got to go for the next round.
I don't have any questions, but I will take the opportunity. Thank y'all. Great round, y'all, and great season. Always fun to be. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
One last question. So it seems like a lot of the issues in the debate just started pretty early on with FSAT, the deficits, and like just general answers to the DISAD. Was there a viable 2AR, or do you think that it was issues that started early in the debate that snowballed?
I almost would have gone for space maybe instead of ag. Maybe, I don't know. I didn't read the space cards, but or like having that in the debate couldn't have hurt. I don't think like the 2AR on food didn't need to be as much as it was in order to get that impact as high as you were going to get it, if you know what I mean. You know, like there's a ceiling, I think, for that impact given the evidence in play, and you could have reached that ceiling with less time than you spent, which maybe would have made space viable. I think like more impacts in the 1AR couldn't have hurt. You know, like you can like quickly extend climate, like the nuke meltdowns thing. Like, yeah, the block has defense, but you can make the 2NR way more annoying than it was in this debate by having more impacts still alive. Because like, you know, the 1AR just kind of made clear like it's food and space, and that's all, you know, and that's all the 2NR has to deal with. But if it's like there's nuke meltdowns, things happening, there's space stuff, there's climate, there's a, you know, like a 1AC like this that is built to have many impacts you should keep that alive as long as possible. Like if the 1AR is going to collapse that much, then you might as well have read more EV on those scenarios in the 1AC. You're not playing to your strengths by collapsing that much in the 1AR. So, but like given what was in the 1AR, I think like space in the 2AR could not have hurt. And I guess like I thought the 2AR had a lot of sections that I just struggled to understand given the evidence in play. Like the whole thing about like, I know what the words arbitrary and capricious mean in the abstract. I have no idea what they mean in this debate with regard to what the AF does or says about administrative law or the APA, what the neg is saying about it, etc. Like if the no link argument is something that's way more simple, that's just like agencies do NEPA a lot, but sometimes they don't have to. We make it so they always have to. That does not broadly collapse the administrative state, because if it did, then SQUO NEPA would thump. We just close the exemptions. What's the link? You know, like if it's just talk to us like cavemen a little bit more. And I think that would go a long way to really, like, you know, it's the 2AR felt like it was just pulled in a bunch of different directions. And it was kind of like this, you know, and like, I get you had limited prep time, it's new AF, whatever. But just cut the extraneous stuff and tell it like it is. And I think you're in way better shape.
I also think like the components that you do talk about with regards to like the AF stuff need to be contextualized more to what the link means, in the sense that what was confusing is that I think the AF does decrease agency flexibility, but it does so by like forcing agencies to do things that the DA like kind of wants them to do anyways. And so if you can kind of say that like you are very insulated, like limited instance of Chevron, such that courts would just have to do things that the DISAD says they should do anyways, like that kind of takes out some of the internal link stuff. But I do think going back to the 2AC and adding some just like Chevron, like limiting agency flexibility good, like, I don't know, it was a little confusing because a lot of the 2AC cards are all like flexibility good, apply NEPA, use scientific standards, don't let like courts politicize. And so that's maybe somewhat contradictory with some of the 1AC stuff, but to the extent it's not including impact terms that are like agencies get politicized, which undermines their ability to do actual innovation and stuff like that. So just like having this baseline standard is good. That sort of like impact turn would help. And then also, but I still think there was some route, including after the block. And I think that the 1AR should have, instead of doing things like reading FDI, which isn't going to like change that much of the impact stuff, like you need to, if you're going to narrow down, which I think to some degree you want to in terms of impact options, you need to be reading more internal link cards on the counter plan instead of just like terminal defense cards on case and being like, here's why like irrigation exports matter, irrigation matters, et cetera, and not just like, you know, another impact card.
All right, yeah, thank you so much for all the feedback, and thank you for judging.
Thank you so much.
Great tournament.